I've been doing research on family history, I guess, approximately 25, 30 years. I got started in doing genealogy through an aunt, my mother's sister, Doris Lancaster, who married a Thompson. She, around the year 1976, she came to us and wanted to know if we wanted to join the DAR, which is the Daughters of the American Revolution. And naturally, we were a joiner, so we said, yeah, we'll join. And then after that, started getting interested in family history and more local history, really. And then you got me really interested into the family part of it, into doing the research on the families and everything. And so when I got your information, I saw that you were interested. I thought, well, it's interesting. I'll add what I can know and everything, and started doing that. And so really been working on family history about 30 years.
Well, did L. Berlin's Sellers Lancaster get you interested in it?
Well, she was my grandmother, Leslie Burley. I was the granddaughter of John Newman Lancaster, and his wife was Leslie Berlin Sellers. Called her Grandma Burley, and that was my grandmother, my mother's mother. And so she was real excited about it, and she had she started gathering a lot of information and got it put together. And then her brother, who was working for the News Reporter in Whiteville, he was the printer. She got him to print it and made the little book that everyone's so familiar with, the little yellow book of our family. And she did not put any dates in it other than just a few Bible records, but she put the connection with the husband and the wife and the children. And of course, Grandma Burley didn't like to admit a lot of things, a lot of little skeletons that might be in the closet and all. And so if the wife was not married and the child was born, or she had a child out of wedlock, in her book she was list the woman's name and say so and so and husband. She would not name the husband. And so that's how she got around that and everything. But it's quite interesting. It's a very useful little book. A lot of people use it. A lot of people got copies of it. And so my grandmother did a lot of it to get me started on it and gave me a lot of the background information, and then along with my aunt. And then as we started talking with mother's sisters, several of them were interested in family and doing research. And they had done a lot of gathering of materials. So it just sort of started putting everybody's materials together is how we came up with it. And then something interesting about Grandma Burley and her research, here a year or two ago, a lady contacted me and wanted to come talk genealogy, and so I told her to come on. And as she was sitting here talking with me, she said, I've got something you might be interested in. She had some of my grandmother's original notes, and how she got them, I really don't know, but they were in her handwriting and in a little notebook that Grandma Burley kept. And somehow a relative of hers had either borrowed them or Grandma Burley had loaned them to her or had given them to her. I really don't know. But she gave me that, and so now I have some of my grandmother's original notes, and quite interesting. Love to read them and look through them and still go back to them whenever I have a question as to who someone's parents were, or who looking for the parents of a child or children and all this. And so now that I have her notes, it's just very meaningful, and just means a lot to me to have some of the things that she worked on. Yes, that little yellow book of Grandma Burley's has been around. And a lot of people do have just copies of it, because I come across it occasionally. Someone will give me a copy and I accept it and say thank you. And
a lot of people don't give her credit for it, though. I've noticed that, too.
Right. But now the one that some people have, but I know some of the local boys, men here in the county that I do genealogy with right now, in their books and all their references, they reference her and give her credit for her book. And so that's going to be nice. And also we're working on a Sellers family book for the Sellers reunion. And in that, we reference back to her book and then give her credit as to how it all got started. I've been thinking about family relatives and growing up, and thinking about that over the past few days as to what I would say if you were to answer a question about my relatives and my family. I know that we always were together. I was trying to think of some specific instances. We lived sort of far apart, and definitely got together like on the weekends and stuff like into this. On my mother's side, it seemed like that the meeting place was at Grandma Burley's. Mother would always, she and Daddy would go down at least once a week to visit. And generally there were some of the other grandchildren around, or some of the other, my aunts and uncles were there. And we would be there and would play. I know I've seen pictures when I was smaller with other cousins as we were there at Grandma Burley's house. And basically that was the only time there and at church whenever we got together. Now on Daddy's side, on his brothers, and he had two brothers and a sister, and then there was each of those just had a child. His two brothers were always away. I always remember Uncle Cliff and Uncle Clyde as living away, and so I did not know their children as well. Geraldine, my cousin, through his sister Susie, she and I were in school together and in class together, and so we were in the same classroom. So she and I were together during the week, and I can remember going down to visit them. And our relatives on my mother's side, as I said, was basically just getting together down at my grandmother's house. I think if I were to be asked the question of someone who inspired me, or someone that I favored, or someone that I thought was especially close to me, someone I'd like to be like, I think of Granddaddy Lyndon. I thought about that question for some time as to who had influenced me, or who I admired as I was growing up. I remember Granddaddy Lyndon quite well. He was a tall man, brownish hair, and I mostly remember him because he was stern, but yet he was a kind person. He could speak. I know he often got on my daddy for picking on my mother. My daddy, Edwin, just loved to play tricks on people, and he didn't care who there was, whether it's the neighborhood, someone in the community, or whatever at Christmas time. And I'll tell you about some of those later on, about the tricks he loved to play. But he also loved to pick on my mother, and he would joke with her and would do things that sometimes would irritate my granddaddy. And one time we were in the tobacco field, and he loved to, as we were coming out of the tobacco field in the afternoon or at lunchtime, getting ready to go in to eat lunch, we'd all be riding on the tailgate. And he would let for Mother to catch up with him to get on the tailgate to ride to the house, and just as she would get almost to the tailgate and ready to sit down, he would pull away, and then she'd have to walk some more feet up ahead. And he loved to play this on everybody. He didn't care who it was, but particularly Mother one time. And I think at that time she was also expecting one of my younger sisters later on as they were born. And Granddaddy was standing up at the house, and he watched this progress all the way from the tobacco field, which at that time was located by Prospect Church, between the church and the home place. And he watched as Daddy would pull the truck up, and then he would not let Mother get on it. She finally wound up walking all the way to the house. And she loves to tell about what Granddaddy said to him. He said, "Edwin, you may be old and married and have children, but," he says, "you're not too old for me to beat." And he said, "Don't ever do that to her again." But Daddy loved to play tricks, and Granddaddy would get on him and would talk to him. But I remember him as a lot at the church, as a church person. One of my favorite pictures of he and Grandma Stellar was as they were getting dressed up one time ready to go to church. And at that time, the ladies all wore a hat, and the men did too with their suits. And Grandma Stellar always had flowers. She had lovely flowers. I remember some of the most beautiful dahlias I've ever seen anyone grow. And she would just have rows, about 2 rows in the garden of just her flowers. And every Sunday she would bring a fresh bouquet of flowers to church. And we have a picture of he and her standing together out in front of the house, and her holding, he's got his Bible in one arm, and she's got her Bible and pocketbook, and then she's holding her vase of flowers in front of her. But he was a church person. And one time during, I was thinking about church and what he said to me, and the reason I admire him so. One time during revival, they let the young people have the devotion prior to the preaching service, just as after they did some singing. Then they would sign a young person to do some scripture reading, and if they wanted to speak. And so I picked out a verse, some scripture, and then I thought, well, when I got up to read it, I thought, well, that's mighty long. So all I read was just the first part of it. I think it was "Judge not that ye be not judged." And later he let me know that that was more scripture that needed to be read there, Gwen, and he proceeded to read the scripture. And also, I remember about singing of songs with Granddaddy. I don't know that he ever sang the songs, but he must have listened, because one time song director announced, or I did one, that we were going to sing a song, but we wouldn't sing all the verses. We'd sing like the first and the last. He said, "Gwen, if they wrote 4 verses, they meant 4 verses to be sung. If they wrote 2 verses, they meant 2 verses to be sung." And so I remember that. Also, he was moderator of the association for many years back in the 60s. And of the Baptist Association. He served as the moderator. And at that time, there was a church down below Shallotte called Cool Run. And something had happened. Their membership was beginning to dwindle, and it looked like that they were going to just close the doors as a church. And so he took it upon himself to go and to work with that church and to build them up. And so every Sunday, or every 2 Sundays out of the month, he would take me with him, because I had learned to play the piano. And he and I went down, and he would lead the church services, and I would play the piano for him. And between he and Mrs. McCracken, and she was the associational missionary at that time, kept that church going until they were able to, the church did dissolve, but I've read the notes, the minutes of how that was taken, and how all the equipment in the church was given to other churches. In fact, our own church, Prospect, got some of the heaters out of that church and all. But Granddaddy, to me, was, I remember him, like I said, a very kind, gentle person, and church related, because that's where we went. We were either at school in the wintertime, in summertime we were working in the tobacco field and on the farm, and then we were in church on Sunday. We were in the revivals and all. And I do remember that my mother had a lot of respect for him. One particular incident was back when they first started wearing, ladies started wearing Bermuda shorts. And that time we were living up at Beaver Dam, which is now where the landfill is. And I remember that I was in the lower grades, and I noticed that Mother, in the living room on the back of a chair, she had a skirt during the summertime, and she was wearing Bermuda shorts. And I asked her, we kind of why this was happening. And she kept him there in case Granddaddy came to the house. She would put on her skirt, because she did not want him to see her in a pair of Bermuda shorts at that time, because it was just, beginning to be popular to wear them. And so I think everyone had respect for him. He was well liked throughout the community and the neighboring community. And in fact, a few weeks ago, a person was talking with me. We were talking family and everything. And that person had a very nice comment. They said that Mr. Linden was a true Southern gentleman. And I thought that was one of the kindest things that could be said about him, as to how he's perceived all these years after his death, that people in the community remembered him as a very kind person. I don't know if I have any interesting stories that I have found out about my family doing, and while I've been doing research, I know it's been a good journey. I've enjoyed it. I've met so many people. And one thing I've always pursued was the Clemmons line as to where the Clemmonses came from. I've tried to determine how the Clemmonses came into Brunswick County. And we know that the Edward was here whenever the county was formed. He was on the tax list, so he was here. In reading and referencing in books, I was led to Cape May, New Jersey, because they said, and there was a reference in Dr. Lee's history of Brunswick County, about how that the fishermen, the whalers, came down from Cape May. Interesting, though, the Clemmons name was not listed among those that came down. There were, the Hewitts and the Ludlums and the Robinsons. And then I thought, well, they married into those families. They were here. Perhaps there was a connection from the Cape May, New Jersey connection coming down from the north, as the migration patterns were. And then it's times I want to think that they came in through Charleston. I really don't know. But I came across an interesting article by a man in Maine, and he lives in Hiram, Maine, and in the history book of Maine, it mentioned about the Clemmons family. Interestingly, this Clemmons was spelled with the one M, and but it had always been my interest and desire to go there, because as I read, it talked about the Clemmons Pond, the Clemmons homestead, the Clemmons road that led through town and all, and I thought, well, there must be some connection there. And so over the years, I've done some research in Maine. One year, I got close to the little community that I wanted to go to. I went to Freiburg and did some research there and on the Clemmons. It's basically some of the same stuff I had. And then last year, I was fortunate enough to be going back to Canada on a trip with my sister-in-law, and I said, there's one thing I've got to do. I've got to go to Hiram, Maine. And so we did, and we stopped in and went to the little community library, which was a real small town, real small community. The ladies were not ready to open up yet, but they said since we'd come so far away, they'd go ahead and open the library up early that day and let us go on in and do some research. As I told her what I wanted, and I was looking in some books, and a lot of it was repeating information I already had and everything, but I never turned down a suggestion or anything that someone gives me. And I said, well, there's a man in Hiram that I've seen that's done a lot of work, this Hubert Clemmons, Herbert, I believe his name was. And she said, oh, well, yeah, he lives right down the road. Said, I'll give him a call. And so she called him, and he was not home. So she said, well, he's more than likely at the Historical Society. And so after we left the library, my sister-in-law and I went down the street to the Historical Society, this old building, went in, and it was a community-like building, went upstairs, and there sitting amongst all the memorabilia and the things about the town was this man sitting down in a rocker chair. And I looked at him, and I introduced myself, told him who I was, and he stood up. And as he stood up, he kept getting taller and taller. And I looked at him, and I could see my father. I thought, if there's ever a connection, I said, you're bound to be a Clemmons. It was so amazing to see a person that had the features of my father, the nose, which is so characteristic of him and all. And so it was very interesting. It was very nice. And he talked to us about the family. He told us where the old Clemmons place was. And we went out and saw the old homestead. I went and talked with the lady and asked her if I could take pictures. And I said, well, where's the pond? Well, to us, a pond is just a little small body of water. And it was a nice lake out at the base of the mountain there right across the road. And so this area was predominantly Clemmons, spelled with the one M. Interesting to know there was a Clemmons line with a connection of some men about the age of the Edward would have been. And so I've been trying to trace that down. So I got a lot of information from him, and I've corresponded with him, and we took pictures, and I had to bring them home to show everybody that did indeed we do. There has to be some kind of connection, but I just have a feeling that eventually someday I will solve the problem of where the Clemmonses came from. So interesting. Yes, I guess everything you do is interesting when it comes to doing research and family history and looking up things and everything. You're asking me what I knew about Alfred Clemmons and about his uh, parents and all. A lot of people have their ideas. I've talked with many people. In fact, I've talked to, I say, 5 or 6 people that were much, much older than I, and in fact, all have passed away now. But in talking with them, they basically have the same storyline as to who his parents were. I do know that one of the elderly ladies that I talked with, the first lady that I talked with, spoke of Alfred, as you said, coming from England or with the red hair, but not all agreed on that. Most people just did not remember, and all have their feelings. In fact, some of the people I talked with were within the family, and to what their feelings were about the situation and speculation and all. And so basically what I have is what everyone agrees to, that he was tall, he did have the reddish hair that's characteristic of the Clemmons family, and that he was a preacher. And I think that's what's known about him more than anything else. And he's remembered more as being a preacher. And I know in my research of the Baptist Association, I came across many records within the association. He was very actively involved, preached in about every associational meeting that was held, and was involved either in giving a report. He was responsible on a committee or in some type of service. I do know that he pastored many churches at many times. I came across a reference to the old Shiloh church where he was pastoring there, and where the association had to subsidize his salary because they said that so many of the members of the old Shiloh church were also residents of the county home, which was right there nearby. And so he preached there. He preached in many of the local communities. I found an old newspaper, one of the oldest newspapers that the Schlote area, and someone, I'd been looking. I knew that there was an older newspaper that had been printed right around the 20s, and 1920. And in that was a short article where he was holding services down at Oak Grove. And so I do know that he went from place to place preaching. He had his own churches. He was pastor at many of the churches here in the Supply and the Bolivia and Schlote areas. As to his preaching, they remember him as a very powerful preaching type of person, a very powerful message, one who was ready to get up and could speak and without much hesitation. So I do know that he was known for this. And as recently, in a connecting line, I do feel like that his mother was J. Rushi Davis. And about a year ago, my mother and I were out following up a lead. I was looking for another Clemmons on my granddaddy's side, an aunt of his that had married over in Columbus County, and I could not find her where she died. And I was trying to find a death record. And just by accident, as we were over in Columbus County and looking through courthouse records and talking with people and then going looking at cemetery books, I came upon some information, and then that she had married into Henry Cannon Smith's family, married his oldest son. And So I knew where Henry Cannon was buried. He was buried there right on the banks looking over the Pireway River, the Walkawall River at Pireway, and that's where he moved to after he left the Shalot area. And so we were looking for the cemetery, and I thought, well, maybe I can find a connection. I'll just keep going back and looking at cemeteries in the area. So an elderly man, I told him what I was looking for, and he said, well, she's buried right up the road. And so we followed his directions to a cemetery. It's called Clark Cemetery. It's in over near Nakina. And he said, go down through the fields, and there's a little cemetery back at the edge of the woods. And so we drove past the fields and went back in there, and there was a lovely little cemetery right in the bend of the farm, the way the fields were made and everything. Several graves there. And so we were walking around looking, and there, over toward the back, in the left-hand corner, was this tombstone with J. Rushy Davis. Smith, J. Rushy Smith. So we went to the courthouse, and luckily she died in 1914, and she had a death certificate. And on the death certificate listed her father as W. Davis, and the mother is M.E. Davis. And so it gave me a pretty good clue that more than likely, and then by checking census records, even though there was a discrepancy of a year or two in the age, and knowing that there was no other J. Rushys in the census at that time, I feel pretty certain that that's her grave. But it was just nice to know that her grave was well kept and is being tended and taken care of. And Henry Cannon Smith was a large landowner, owned thousands and thousands of acres. At one time, he was established in Shalot at what is now Smith Avenue, where the shopping center is. And from there, Smith Avenue leads out toward the Walkawall River, and then the old New Britain Road went on up and then turned and went toward Pireway. And so he moved from the Shalot area. So he lived in Brunswick County. He was in the Brunswick County census in 1850. But he then takes his family and he moves to Pireway and establishes there. And his oldest boy married Jerusha Davis. And by putting dates together and events and all, I feel pretty sure that that's where she is buried today. But it's, as I said, it's just nice to know that her grave is taken care of and is well tended, and I think would be a tribute to any family. And of course, you realize that all this is speculation and guesstimation of putting together the best ideas that we can come together with on the situation. We still, though, should be mindful of the heritage that he's provided for us. Think of all the children and grandchildren and how they're so involved today still in the church. The pastors, in fact, Anthony, A.W.'s boy, was here yesterday, and we were talking, and he said he had 5 or 6 people come to him and say, Anthony, that had heard Mr. Alfred preach, said, you're just like him. You have the same mannerisms within the pulpit. You have the same type of sermons, the characteristics. And so when you think of that, and you think of the legacy that he's left, that we dwell on the I guess we'd say what he has left to future generations and what he has done for us as a family, because I think the family is respected within the community and within the church community, within the county, and that he just presented us with high ideals, and really that it's good to be called a Clemmons and to be known that we have such a rich heritage and the legacy that he's left for us, because it's so evident, like I said, with the churches and the information we have, the children that he raised and then their grandchildren all have gone on to be prosperous, to have had good jobs, good education. I know my parents, we were the first generation, me and my brothers and sisters were the first generation to go to college. but that was a desire that we do this. And my parents said they would work whatever to get us to go to college and to get us an education, and they've always inspired that in us. They had to have had it somewhere taught to them and presented to them that you build and that you make yourself a better person and make the community around you better. So I think even though I didn't know Mr. Alfred or Granddaddy Alfred, I've seen a picture of him, 2 or 3 pictures, and then I've heard such good stories about him. Everyone speaks so favorably of him, and everyone just have good remarks for him, and for Grandma Jenny and the way they raised the children, and the way that they brought them up within the church, that we have a lot to be thankful for. And I'm so great, even though, as I said, I didn't know him personally, I never saw him dying before I was born. Still, it's nice to know that I am of the same blood as he. The story that I heard of the tar shack came through a very close family member. To me, a tar shack was a little small house, and when they say tar, they meant tar paper that was used to board up the outside the house, which indicated that it was not a very prosperous place. And I was told that Jerushi lived in a tar shack near where today the landfill is, where the King family lived, where you turn to go into the landfill, which we know is Beaver Dam. And of course, that's where I was born and raised first 6, 7 years of my life. And it was in that area that there just a little house was located, and who she was living with, I do not know, but that apparently she lived close by Mr. Joe and was close by in the area, was a close neighbor. But that's the only thing I know, just what someone has told me about it being a little small house, or one, I don't even know how many rooms. But the fact that it was covered in tar paper meant that it was, of lowly conditions.
Was she living there by herself?
See, I don't know. I don't know anything about her other than what I've been able to glean through what other people have told me and what I found within the records and all.
Well, how do you know, as you figured out how old she would have been in 1872, I guess, when Alfred was born?
Well, we can look at her death certificate and what was written on her tombstone. There's a variation of about 2 years, as I said earlier, with the census records, as to what the census records and the death certificate are off by about 2 years, but yet close enough to be the same person. Right offhand, I can't remember without looking at the books as to when her birth is.
Okay.
You asked me about my memories as a child. I distinctly remember, as a young person, as I said, growing up on Beaver Dam, which is the name that was given to the acreage of land there that Daddy owned. It was being on Beaver Dam Creek, and as I've said previously, is where the landfill is located today, so you know the proximity of where it is. I have lots of memories of growing up. A lot of those have been told to me. The earliest that I've been told, and I'll tell you some of those first, and then I'll build up to the things that I remember, if that's okay. We lived, Mother and Daddy, after they married, lived there at Beaver Dam, about 15 to 20 miles from Southport. And so when it was time for me to be born, Daddy took Mother to Southport to stay with Aunt Maxie, and that's Maxine, and she was a nurse there for the doctor. And tradition was that since we were so far away from the hospital, that Daddy would take Mother in, and he did this with all the children, would take her in to stay with Aunt Maxie a few weeks before the due date of the child. And I was born on July 5th, 1941, and Daddy had taken Mother down, and Mother just delights in telling the story of how the doctor wanted to participate and go to the beach on the 4th of July and didn't want me to be born, and so he gave her a pill to take that would delay my birth. And supposedly this happened, and so I was born on July 5th. And then the next thing that I remember Mother telling me about is growing up was Daddy grew tobacco, and then in the fall of the year, as he would take the tobacco and they would prepare it for the market, as he would go to the market, that he took me with him. And Mother said, we were trying to figure the age out some time ago, and I was about 18 months because I was still in diapers and still on a bottle. And Daddy thought nothing of taking me and going all the way to the tobacco market at that age. Mama said he put a diaper in one pocket and a bottle in the other and took me. And then he had an elderly black man that worked with him there on the farm, and by the name of Israel. And he and Israel would go to Whiteville to the tobacco market and take me with them and think nothing about it. And so I remember Mother telling me that. I also remember her telling me about how that in the fall, when they would go and cut the corn for the horses and for the animals there on the farm to eat, that they would go down in the cornfield, and they had an old tobacco drag pulled by the mule. And Israel and I were in the drag, and the mule ran away and turned over. And he was real concerned because I fell out. And so I remember her telling me about that. I remember as they were working in the tobacco, as in the fall of the year, and when they got ready for preparing it for the market and all, that the barn was, they were upstairs. It was a mule barn and rooms all connected together, and the mules were down below, and they had to climb up a ladder and go up to the second story, and that's where the tobacco is located. And of course, there was always that fear that we got near that hole. She tried to keep us away from where the ladder went up in case we, falling down. We children would go out in the edge of the barn and take the tobacco sticks and make us a house. And we'd have it several stories high. It was just a fort-like shaped square form of tobacco sticks. And we would build that, and we'd climb up into there. We would find little little beans around the seed pods that we would take and shell as peas, and we'd cook and have house and such. And I remember working in tobacco. I know one time there was a pump pipe nearby, an old pump that Daddy had taken the pump off, and the pipe was empty. And for somehow we got up with one of Mother's butcher knives and dropped it down the pipe. And I remember that. I was still living at Beaver Dam. Mother, at the middle of the day, as it got ready to eat, she would send me to the house because I was the oldest girl. And so she'd send me to the house to get things started before she got there. And I remember one time when she was first teaching me how to cook, she said, now I want you to go up and cook this fat back. Now if it starts to pop, you just drop a little flour into your fry pan. And well, by the time I got through putting flour in, it was just almost caked over all of the fat back. And then another time she sent me to the house and to get dinner out on the table. And I am not told this until just a few years ago, how that I was getting all the vegetables and stuff off of the stove and put them to the table. Somehow I turned the collards over in the floor. And so I just reached down in my bowl and put them in it and put them on the table and never did tell them. But I remember that when I was in the first grade, Daddy decided that it would be best to go and build a little house out on the highway where Coble Ward Smith is now, the funeral home, so that I could catch the school bus. And so he went out and built this little house, and we stayed there 1 year. And he had to drive back in or walk through the woods. Actually, it's what he did. Walk back in to Beaver Dam to farm. And this was just too much for him, so the next year we moved back into the house in Beaver Dam, and then he would take us out to the road, and by that time my brother was ready to go to school. And he was also involved right along that time in sawmilling with his daddy. They had a sawmill down at Charlotte. And he'd rigged up and made an old skidder. And so on real cold mornings, he would put us on the skidder and take us out to meet the school bus. And then in the afternoon, Stuart and I had that mile to walk back home. And the best thing, though, was about halfway in, Mother would be there waiting for us. She and Elaine would walk out to the road, and they'd get about halfway, and then Stuart and I would come along, and then she'd walk back with us. So I remember, that happening. Then as we grew older, we moved to where we lived whenever at the Charlie Cason place, which is right near where we're situated now, and where the old home place is considered. And then we had to go into Beaver Dam to work in the fields and do tobacco. And Mother would always have a dish pan. She'd cook her butter beans the night before and put them in a jar. And she would take our dinner for that day within the dish pan. And then at lunchtime, we'd stop and eat them. And we worked in tobacco. We always had to take out a barn of tobacco before we put one in. Thursdays was our barning day. And we would have to go up into tier poles, and Stuart, being the boy, he got to be the one who was on the highest tier post to hand the tobacco down. And of course that was nice because then you didn't get sand in your eyes, particularly during the season when the lugs came off and all, because there was so much sand. And so I distinctly remember that. I do remember, and I've said it many, many times, that year that I was a senior in high school, and I knew that was the last summer because I was getting ready to go to Campbell College. I remember distinctly telling them under the tobacco barn that last day, I said, well, girls, this is it. I will not be back in our tobacco barn. I said, there's two things that I will not marry, and that's a farmer and a fisherman, because I had seen how hard it was, the long hours for the farmer, and how we did all the work. And I said I'd seen my friends' parents fish and dig oysters and clams during the wintertime, and I knew what a hard life it was. And I told them, I said, I will get an education, and I will not marry a farmer or a fisherman. That Beaver Dam swamp goes all the way around the fields. And one time, I think it must have been just before we moved up here. For some reason, the revenuers thought that Daddy had a still up there. They had found a liquor still over on Middle River Road on the creek there. And they thought, since it was so close to him, and they had actually gone in and had hidden in one of the tobacco barns. And Daddy did not even know they were on the property, but they thought that they were watching that liquor still, thinking it was his, but it wasn't. But after they discovered it and found out it was not, they asked him to destroy it, and so he went in with a tractor or something that he had to destroy it. And then, interestingly, just a few months later, it just reappears, so they would just move from one place to another and everything. Thinking about the games that we used to play as children, I think most of the games were games that we just created. We each had a tricycle. I distinctly remember and have a picture of me about the first grade on a little tricycle that we had. So I remember a tricycle. I know that we used to, when I went to my friends' houses, we would create games using a ball, throwing it over the house. One would stand on one side of the house and one would stand on the other, and we'd throw the ball over the house, and if you caught it, then you got to run around the other side of the house and try to catch the person before they could get there. But basically games that we created, like I said, they're on with the bicycles and the tricycles that we had. the little houses that we built, and we'd always clear off an area and design us a house and lay it out in the edge of the woods and everything, and rake out around it and create little areas like this, and then pick up things that we found to be our different parts of the houses and all. I know that I started taking piano at an early age. At that time, it was taught at school, and if you wanted to have piano lessons, you could pay, or it could leave the classroom and go, and the teacher would work with you 30 minutes. But I didn't have a piano, but I distinctly remember playing on Mother's sewing machine. I would practice on her after the sewing machine was closed down. I would put my music in front of me, and I would finger along. And a lot of it was improvised, a lot of the things that we did. As for toys and foods, I didn't like growing up. I didn't like tomatoes and onions. Today, I love tomatoes. It seemed like after I got out of high school and got into college and got introduced to other foods and all, that I did that. I still don't favor onions as much, although I cook with them if I have to, and but I generally tend not to. Like all foods, I don't know of anything that I don't like, and I think everyone in our family eats well and healthy. You asked me about Christmas and how we celebrate Christmas and what we did. Just as with living and growing up, it was low-keyed. I know that we always opened presents on Christmas morning, what presents there were. Mostly it was from, quote, Santa Claus, unquote. And but that always occurred on Christmas morning. We never opened presents on Christmas Eve. And I know that growing up, that on Christmas morning, that whenever we would go and look around the tree, that everything would be in little stacks. And Stuart would have his stack of items, 2 or 3 pieces of clothing, and then some toys. And then I would have mine, and Elaine and Julie, and then with the baby Edwina. And so I remember that each of us had our own little stack of items, and for somehow we always recognized which belonged to us, either where we'd ask. Mother ordered everything through the Sears and Roebuck catalog, and it just amazed us to how she could get it ordered and get it back, and we would never do anything about it. And we never could find it. I don't know that we really looked for it. I know up in age, as some of us got older, we tended to want to look for Santa Claus. But somehow, Mother would always order, and as I said, through the Sears catalog, and it would come and she would have it ready for us. She made all of our clothes. I never had a store-bought dress till I got in college. In fact, the one that I went to college in was the clothes that she had made. But somehow she sewed for 4 girls and herself. And we always had 5 dresses. And I know I've gotten off the subject, but I thought about the clothes. Had 5 dresses, one for each day of the week. And somehow she managed to make them. We always had a new Easter dress. And she always sewed those and made them for us. And they were always very stylish in what the girls were wearing and all. But getting back to the Christmas and the idea of our gifts and our toys, very distinctly that we could identify our own pile of items according to what we'd asked for. A lot of celebration always was Christmas at church. And we always had a Christmas program. We always participated in it. We played some role within the Christmas program. And then at the conclusion, we always had a visit from Santa Claus. Somehow someone would come and would play the role of Santa Claus at church. And we, at church now, we drew names. And everybody then would buy one gift for the person whose name they had. Daddy was a jokester. He loved to play pranks, and I'll tell you about some of his pranks in just a minute. But he loved to play tricks on everybody. He delighted in just being humorous. And so one time Santa Claus came to church, and he was walking up the aisle, and he turned over to Daddy, who was sitting on about the second row. Granddaddy Lyndon was on the left side of the church on the front row, and Grandma Stellar always sat over on the right-hand side on the front row. And when Santa Claus got up to Daddy, he turned to him, he says, "And little boy, what would you like Santa Claus to bring you?" And in a real loud voice, he said, "A baby brother." And Grandma Stellar turned and looked at him with the most stare you could be. I mean, she just turned that chin a little bit and gave him an awful frown, because he just delighted in doing this and telling tales and such. But we always had a church program, and that was when Santa Claus came to visit. The men of the community loved to play tricks on each other. They were just jokesters also. It seemed like that was part of the mood and the spirit of the time. This was their way of entertainment. And previous to Christmas, Daddy still had the skidder. And skidder was an old truck that was cut down so that it just had the seats where you could sit. The cab was taken off, and then the back part was fixed so that he had a winch and could attach to a cable to cars and pull them or put the logs on it and all. And Mother and Daddy were asleep late at night. It was real cold, and a telephone called. Telephones had just gotten in. We got telephones in the 50s. So this happened around 1956, 57, somewhere like that. Daddy got a phone call from a neighbor that a cousin of his was up the Makitoki Road at that time, which was dirt, and needed him to come pull him out of the ditch and come and bring him home. And so Daddy gets out on this very cold night. He had let the water out of the radiator because it was freezing. He had to put water in the radiator. He gets on that skidder and with no protection and drives about 10 miles up into Green Swamp. And he drives and never does find anybody. He realizes that someone has played a trick on him. So he turns around and he comes back home. And he goes over and goes to his neighbor's house and walks up real quietly and goes up and he feels the car, and he realizes that the car has just been run and all. And so he goes inside and has him a seat and sits down and sits there till daybreak. And he never would tell him why he was there, but it just got them up out of bed and caused this to happen. So then at Christmas time, our neighbor, he had Santa Claus for his children over at his brother's house. And so Daddy waited until he left his house and drove out to the dirt road and went to his brother's house to pick up his Santa Claus. Daddy goes and with a chainsaw cuts a tree across the road so that he has to stop. He cannot get to his house. So then he has to take his Christmas and walk it up to his house and go back to the car 2 or 3 times. And so they just played tricks on each other. One time he and Mr. Warren Phelps decided they'd have some fun with the law. They were up in the Green Swamp, and they were driving through, and I remember him telling something about they had a jar, and they took it and they threw it in the ditch like they had liquor and all, and they'd drive real slowly, and he said that law just followed them the whole time, just knew that he was going to catch them, and of course when he got up with them, they were just joking and laughing with him. But Christmas was a fun time, and low-keyed, it was just... you got up and we had our gifts, our presents, our Santa Claus, and then of course we always went to the grandparents to visit, and our grandmothers always had something for us, a small item or whatever. Today, our families, we still get together on Christmas. We tend to get together on Christmas Eve and eat together as a family, the sisters. My brother's now deceased. And so the sisters in the family get together, and we'll either have oysters or some type of cookout like that. Most times we do tend to have oysters around, and we just rotate the houses around from one house to the other to eat and everything. So we tend to get together now on Christmas Eve, since we're all grown and the children are all grown up also and gone. So it's basically then Christmas Day we just visit each other in this manner. But Christmas, like I said, the connection with the home and the connection with the church was our community and our life. Entertainment, I think television changed it. As I said, in the 50s, whenever television first came to be, Granddaddy Lyndon had the first TV in the community, and then we had the second. And I remember that everybody came to visit because TV didn't come on till about 6 or 6:15 in the afternoon. And they'd have the 15-minute news program, and then they would have the music programs, and particularly during the ball games, when they started televising the ball games, the ACC basketball games, the house was filled with people because those who had the televisions, the other people went to their houses and would visit. We visited anyway. There was always visitation between the families and such. It seemed like the television brought more people in, and particularly the young people. I remember I was in high school, and how the ones of the community, we would come together and watch the basketball games. On Sundays, we always got out and walked, and we would meet together down at the bridge, and the young people would get there. We just walk up and down the dirt road as it was at that time, carve your initials in the bridge and names and such, and things like into this, because that was the type of entertainment that we had, really was that. Going to the beaches, I remember Mom and Daddy would take us to the beach on afternoons. We'd go down and ride the ferry across and go to the beach. I remember that. We had family reunions. We had gatherings. I think I remember, or either I've been told enough that I think I remember the event that when Aunt Virginia's husband was killed in the bus accident on that 4th of July, that we were down at the river then. And I believe I remember that. But I know my parents have talked about it enough that I think I remember it. But there were family get-togethers. Like I said, always the church idea of being together in the church. I remember Uncle Lindsay praying when they had his birthday party, how he prayed till the candles burnt the cake. And I know you've probably heard that story told about Uncle Lindsay up at Mount Olive Church.
No, not that one.
Not that one. They always had a birthday party and had a cake, and they lit the candles and then asked him to pray. And he prayed until the candles burned out. And so it had burned, and I remember it going right down into the cake. And thinking about that made me think about, we were still up at Beaver Dam and going out to Mount Olive Church when it was located there where the cemetery, right beside the cemetery across from the community college. And we got home and started counting kids, and all of us weren't there. And Mother thought I think it was Elaine that had crawled under the bench and went to sleep. And Mother thought Daddy put her in the car, and Daddy thought Mama would put her in the car, and so he had to turn around and come back out and go to church and get her and everything. But we did that. GA meetings, I remember going to meetings in other churches, and we would stay in the homes of the people, and they would take us in and keep us like that overnight and such for church events. I've wandered in my thought now, but I was trying to get back to where we were talking about some of the things that we did for entertainment and gatherings. Certainly family focused, being together as a family, doing things together as a family. I have pictures of Mother and Daddy as they would get together with her brothers and sisters and go fishing and just enjoy being together down at the river, and the cookouts, going down and picking up oysters in the fall of the year and having oyster roast and such. Some of the happiest moments of my life and some of the saddest. I think, we'll start with sadness. I think when we think of sad times, of course, we think of deaths of our loved ones. And I think that was one of the saddest times because when my father passed away, because I had not experienced death other than of a grandparent. I do remember that when Granddaddy Lyndon died, that I was not home at the time. I was away. And how that Daddy sent someone up to Campbell, and then Geraldine was at Rex Hospital in Raleigh, and how that he sent someone up to pick us up and to bring us back home for the funeral of Granddaddy Lyndon. And of course that was sad because he was the one I emulated a lot, and I admired him so much, and I spoke of him earlier about how much I loved being around him and being with him, and enjoyed him. Daddy's passing was, of course, very sad, but yet I had been with him through his final days as he died, and so we were experiencing death over several weeks. And it was so ironic that that day that he died, and he was at the house, it was on a Sunday afternoon. That Sunday we knew that he was quite low, and the nurse from hospice had come in. All the children were here, all the grandchildren were here, and they were out in the front yard playing, and he could look out of his window and see all the grandchildren out there playing in the front yard, and playing ball and tag and chasing around and everything. And it was nice to know that his final sights were those of his grandkids. And it was also interesting that no one came to visit that day. Later, a lady told me, she said, we drove by and was going to stop and go in your house and visit with your mother and daddy, but for some reason, we didn't do. They didn't stop. And, of course, my oldest son, Steve, was in college at NC State, and he had left and gone back home. And, of course, that night, just after he left, then Daddy passed away, and, of course, he came back home also. And truly that was sad. It's sad any time to lose a loved one. And then the passing of our brother, who was so young. Stuart, he was to us. Jesse, he was to the professional community. He was known as Jesse Clemmons. We called him Stuart. But as the community, as he came back and worked at the community college, and people knew him as Jesse. And so we often call him Jesse now, even today. Died at such a young age. He was in his late 40s. And just seeing him die with cancer, but yet still with the optimism that he had and the outlook that he had, that he really thought that he thought that things would get better, but yet he knew realistically that eventually death would come, and he had accepted it. And I think the rest of us had too, to the extent that we could. And truly, his passing was very hurtful. It was a very sad moment. And even today, you know, we even though he died back 1991, you still have fond memories and have days, particularly when I go out to the cemetery and look around and check to see how things are doing out there. That when you go past his grave and all, you still have those moments. So there are sad times. Sadness, I think you think of death. Happiness are all the good times that we had as kids. I mean, we loved to play. Daddy loved to play. Mother loved to play. It was just a good time. And we grew as a family. We loved each other, and yet we fought each other. I know in the afternoons, getting off the school bus, it was a race to see who could get to the broom first, because that was the one that got to beat up on everybody else. And but I know growing up as children, I being the oldest, I was out of the home before the other children, and so I didn't get to see them grow up as much. But I've heard a lot of stories about them, a lot of tales. I do know one of my fondest, happiest moments was me being the oldest, and then when Edwina, the baby, was born, She was born in February, and Mother loved to work in the fields. She'd rather work in the fields than stay at home. And so that fell my lot to stay home. And so I really sort of raised my youngest sister. And even today, she tends to look to me as her mother. And Edwina and I have a real close bond. And I remember putting her on the porch swing on a pillow and rocking her and swinging her and taking care of her. I also remember the time that as she grew to be she was about 3 or 4 years old, as we were around the house and I was cooking and washing, doing the jobs that I did while Mother was working. She had her little baby doll that she was carrying around and her little pocketbook in her arms. But suddenly, later that afternoon, when Mother and Daddy came back from the field, she was not doing well. She was sort of sickly. And she was acting funny, and one of the neighborhood men was there at the house visiting. And it even upset him the way she was acting, because she began to act real crazy and funny like. Come to find out that as I was feeding her the bottle, giving her her bottle, she had a little bottle in her pocketbook of medicine that she was pretending to give to, and I thought she was using that as her bottle for the baby. She was drinking it. She had drunk a whole bottle of cough syrup. And she just went crazy. She just went out of her mind. And so they called the ambulance and started her to Wilmington, and the ambulance had a flat tire halfway to Wilmington, and they had to stop and take her on. And I remember, but they had to give her a tracheotomy to help her breathe and everything. But raising her, I think, was truly happy, because I loved her and still do. And so happy moments together, working in the fields together, even though at times when it was so hot cropping tobacco. And those old tops had to come out. And you were going down the row, and you had took one row with your left hand and one with your right hand. And it would be so hot when you get to the end of the rows. And but we had to work. That was life. I mean, that's the way we had to do it. And Mother and Daddy taught us this. They taught us work ethics. One time up at Beaver Dam, we were working out in the tobacco field, and we were going down a row, hoeing and topping, and suddenly Daddy said, "Stop." He heard a dog. He said, "Now you just watch the end of that row." He said, "There's going to deer come along there in just a minute, because that dog is chasing that deer." Come to find out, Stewart had left and gone down to the end of the field, and he was pretending to be a dog. And so we just did that together. We had fun times. You know, at the time it didn't look like fun. It didn't seem like fun. But then when we sit and we talk and we share with each other and reflect back, they were happy times. Just delightful times to be together as a family and the things that we did. My most memorable experience. I don't know. There's so many things that stick out of each time frame. It was according to the period of the age that I was living. I think in my younger youth, it was the carefree, the freedom that we had as children. The no worry type of thing, where we could just play around and dig up the doodle bugs under the tobacco barn, or build the toad frog houses with our feet. Those carefree days that we had as young people. Later on, the responsibility that came to me in the house and in the household, as I had to take on a role and to help out. In high school, I played basketball, and to be on a winning team, as I was, and so much so, I believe that we were going to win that tournament in that year. I think it was 58, because I graduated from high school in 1959. Daddy, we were building the new house, and Daddy was laying the foundation, and we went, and in the foundation, as he placed the cement in, I wrote in the foundation, as it was beginning to harden, Charlotte High School, County Champions, 1958. And then later on that weekend, we did go on to win the championship as a girls' team. And so most memorable. Being in high school, the responsibility that suddenly a teacher, I really never thought that I didn't know much about the future and what it was like, but I had a teacher that in 10th grade, Miss Johnson Holden, just passed away. She said, "Gwen, I want you to be editor of the school newspaper." And I said, "I can't do that." And she says, "Yes, you can." And she had the confidence in me that I could do something. And from that moment on, I thought, well, maybe I can. And Daddy taught us to be very independent. Now, I mean, he raised 4 independent girls, and he raised Mama. He helped her to be independent. But he raised us to be very independent, to take care of ourselves, to feel good about ourselves, to do a job and to do it right, and not to slack off. And I think of what he taught us. And to me, I can look back now and see that there were good times. There were good memories as we were together as a family, not having a lot, but yet having a lot. And as they took care of us, I remember talking about the family responsibility as I was learning to cook biscuits. Mother was having the last child, Edwina, and when she was in the hospital, I had to cook the supper and take care of everything. And I was trying to make biscuits, and they rose up like mountains, and then they erupted. And they were tough. I know they were hard. And Elaine decided to laugh at my biscuits, and Daddy just spanked her right there at the table. He said, she's learning how to cook biscuits, and you're not going to laugh at her. And so I remember that time. I just remember the good times that we had, and I think the good outweighs the bad. I know it was hard. I know that old house was cold. I remember the wind coming through the window panes at night. I remember all those blankets. We had so many blankets piled on us during winter time you couldn't turn over. And it was cold. I remember, the party line telephones. I mean, that was fun to have a telephone. But you remember you had the party line. And, but I remember the times that we got together at church. I remember Miss McCracken, as she was associational missionary, and she believed in me. She came to help us have Bible school, and she would go around to all the churches that were not able to have Bible school, and then she asked me to help her lead Bible schools. And I thought that was a big. Now I look back on it, and that was a big responsibility, but I didn't hesitate, because she took me under her wings and she helped me, and she was a great influence on my life. In fact, led me to believe that I would go into some type of ministry at one time. In fact, when I went to college, I thought I would be a missionary, and that were my intentions. And she had a big influence on my life. And so the church had the influence, the family had the influence. My parents, who always believed in us, who put us and said, "You're going to college." In fact, that first day when Daddy drove us it was on a Sunday afternoon, he drove me to Campbell. I was about ready to turn around and come back, and I would have. But he said, "No, you're staying." And after I got over it, realizing that was good, that was one of the best things that happened. And so they saw that we all had an education. It was hard work. They mortgaged, they borrowed, but yet they paid back at the end of the year, and somehow were able to send us all to school. And so, happy times, good times, just fun times to be together, and to think of the influence that our family and our parents had upon us.
What did you study at Campbell?
I started out in religion at Campbell, and I attended there. I started in the fall of '59, and I actually applied to Meredith because, being Baptist, it was assumed that we'd go to a Baptist school. And I did not have enough foreign language in high school for Meredith's qualifications. And so they suggested that I apply at Campbell, which at that time was a junior college. It was a residential high school and junior college, 2 years of high school. and then junior college. And so I applied there and was accepted there, and started out in religion, and for the first 2 years. And then I had a history professor who told me, Gwen, he said, you're in the wrong field. He said, you'll never make it. You don't want to. He says, you want to teach. And I thought, that's the farthest from my mind I would ever think of being a teacher. And so in sophomore there, and that was the year that Granddaddy died also, and we had to come home, and I missed some exams at the end of the year, and I had to take them after I had to go back to school and take them after his death and all, and after his passing. And so went on in and went into education. Granddaddy, before he passed away, Campbell was in a big fundraiser, and they came down and asked him and several other men within the Baptist Association and Miss McCracken to participate in fundraising for the college. And so apparently, they had the confidence that he could do something. And he and Daddy and several of the others, and they raised quite a lot of money here in the county for Campbell. But I did graduate. I actually was in the first graduating class, a 4-year graduating class of Campbell College, which today is Campbell University. My plans were, at the end of my sophomore year, we had to transfer. And I thought, well, I'll transfer to Meredith then. But then they transferred, they were going to go on and make it a senior college. And so they added on 2 years. Well, I felt led toward history and health and physical education. And so when I went into health and physical education, that fall there were 2 of us, 2 ladies, young women we were at that time, but there were only 2 of us in the women's part of the program, and there were about 15, 16 boys. And so just starting out and instituting all these new programs, they couldn't establish a separate program for the women and for the men, so they put us in with classes with the boys. And our training, every class we took right along with the young boys there, the men there in college, our fellow classmates, and we did everything together, every class, from anatomy to golfing, except when it came to athletic training and conditioning. And then the only time they separated us was when we had to tape a muscle on the side of your body, and one of the lady instructors took the 2 girls into the bathroom, and we taped each other up. But otherwise, every class I took was right along with the boys. And so I graduated then, did my student teaching in Coates, which was about 4 or 5 miles away, at a high school there. And Kathy, the girl that was in school with me, she and I both, we did our student teaching right at the same place. I did the 7th and 8th grade, and she did the high school. We rode together back and forth to do that. And so then from that, I was in, as I said, the first senior graduating class of Campbell. Coached basketball and taught health and PE for about 15 years. Had a winning basketball team, high school team that I coached, and did health and physical education for 15 years. And then in 1975, I moved back home, back home to the county. And at that time, Brunswick County did not have health and PE teachers, and the few they had were like the high schools. Could not get a job, and so they took me into the classroom. And then I became a self-taught classroom teacher. I'd never had a methods class in reading, social studies, math, or anything. But I went into the classroom because I had to have a job, and that was what was available. Started out as a substitute teacher, filling in for ladies on maternity leave, and then started in 7th and 8th grade, and did social studies, language arts, and did that for several years. Then I moved, I felt as I began to get older, realizing that perhaps the stress level could be a little less, I went down in the grades and went to the 5th grade. and then I would move between fourth and fifth. My last years were fourth and fifth grade. Dearly loved them. Dearly loved fourth and fifth graders. Fourth graders were still not quite independent. They wanted to learn. They wanted to do everything they could for you. They called your grandma without thinking, and they'd come up and hug you without any trepidation of that they had done something wrong. Fifth graders, independent enough to do things and begin to do research on their own. And after 31 years, decided that I would retire. My youngest son went off to college. I could have retired at 30, and I thought, well, I hate to put another kid in college and not have a full-time job. So I taught another year. So I finished in 1997 with 31 years winding up in the classroom. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and still miss school. Still miss the kids. Every fall when the school bus goes by, I miss it. When my teacher friends get together and talk and about what they're doing in the classroom. So still a little nostalgia there. I still miss it. But I dearly loved education, and I think back to that professor that I had that thought I thought he was crazy, but he steered me on the right direction. I still, from the religion side, the ministerial side, active in the church, teach Sunday school, adult Sunday school at Prospect, about 25 years now, church clerk, church pianist, and then I know they asked me to write Centennial History of the Brunswick Baptist Association, and I wrote that, and back in 2000 won a state award for it. It's the best associational history book from the state convention, so that was nice. And still active, within my church and within my community in different organizations. Lineage societies, I belong to 4 of those. I'm active leadership, state and national roles in those and everything. So I just enjoy doing, and I enjoy doing for others. Someone says, when are you going to start charging for your research, or when someone asks you a question, or I get an email question, want me to look up something for them in the county. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing for others. I get a delight out of it. My research is not complete. My files aren't. I got an extensive collection of local history files. They're still in boxes that needs to be filed. But I put others ahead of me, and I just enjoy doing it for people. I enjoy doing research and doing for other people and helping them, and I get a lot of pleasure out of it.
That's great. Our kids are moving from the 4th to 5th grade. They'll be in the 5th grade.
Oh, that's the best age. I dearly love those 5th graders, particularly when they come back to you and they'll say, "You were my teacher," and so, it's such nice to have them back. I didn't mean to rattle on.
That's all right. No, anything you want to talk about. In fact, is there anything that I think we went through all my questions here. Is there anything else you wanted to say or talk about?
Anything else I wanted to talk about? I haven't told you about my kids yet.
Oh, okay. All right, go right ahead.
I've tried to think over the past few days what I wanted to talk to you about and different things. I've tried to cover basically what my life was like and growing up.
Well, what about how did you meet your husband?
How to meet my husband? Well, some teachers at school told me. I came back to the county in 1975 and went through a divorce. And then I was the sole caretaker for my young son, Steve. And so I started teaching. Of course, being able to teach school was a plus because I had a job. And Mother and Daddy helped me to get reestablished in a place to stay, and it would help me with Steve and at times when I was at teachers' meetings and stuff. And I was teaching at Waccamaw up in the Ash area. And the fellow teachers knew that I was single, and they said, "We know somebody you need to meet. He's down at the store, works down there at Fess Evans' store." I said, he's Fess's wife's brother. He's from South Carolina, Myrtle Beach. And said, you need to stop in there. So he said, he'd be a good match for you. And so I just pushed him off because I really wasn't interested. And they kept, have you stopped by yet? And so finally one afternoon I stopped by the station. And he came out and pumped gas. And then they started teasing me at school because then they said, well, we never had our gas pumped before. We never had our windshield wiped before and all this. But that's where I met him as I was teaching up at Waccamaw, and he was there helping run the store for his brother. Actually, he was born and raised in Wampee, which is a little small town outside of, a little community outside of Myrtle Beach and all. And so I met him there, and he grew up there. He went to Wampee High School, played basketball there. He went to Spartanburg Methodist College, and at that time it was a work-study school. Spartanburg Methodist School was, and so they would work 2 weeks there on campus, and then they'd be in class 2 weeks. And he tells of doing this, and then the only way they could get home was to walk and hitch a ride. He came up similar conditions, had many more children. There were 11 of him. He was was one of 11 children, and they grew up on a farm also. And it was amazing that so many of them they put them to college, and how they did it I don't know. But all of his sisters turned out to be teachers. And so you know what we talk about when we get together. We always talk about being teachers and there. But met him there. And as I said, Steve, my oldest son, is adopted. And my first husband and I were living in Burlington. He was a minister of music in a church. And we went to Hickory, North Carolina, to pick him up. We went through the welfare service. Social services of the county, and they said that we found a child. Want you to go look at him and see if you want him. Said so. We went over to about 2-3 counties away, and they took us in and they said, we've got a little child here. Said he's a little naughty-headed baby, and at the time what they meant was he had a cephalohematoma. Whenever he was born, he just had a bruise on his head, a little knot. And they said that he was such an adoptable child that they wanted to try to adopt him out. And at that time, they adopted at 3 months. And this was 5 months. He was 5 months old. But they said they wanted to have him checked out by the neurosurgeon and all to be sure that he was an adoptable child. And so Steve and I came back home. And as I said, Daddy helped us establish a house and gave me a card. And so then when Buster and I decided to get married, the welfare people then still had to come because he was in the adoptive system. And he decided he wanted to have his name changed to Causey. And so they got involved, and they came out to visit with him and was talking with him and us together. And she said, now, you want to change your last name to Causey? He said, yes, and I want to change my other name too. He said, I want to be Steve Mark. Well, my husband's named Mark. In fact, he's Mark Jr. So you've got Mark Sr., his father. You got Mark Jr., my husband, who is Buster. And then Steve wanted to change his name to Steve Mark. And then our youngest son is Mark III. So all three of my husband and my 2 sons all have Mark within their name. And but Steve did want to change and have Mark as a part of his name and everything. And so he's now, he lives in Winston-Salem, married to Karen. They have our only granddaughter, Addison, who is 2. And then our youngest son, Mark, is getting ready to get married in September of this year. And so then both boys, Mark lives in Raleigh, works with Siemens Corporation. Steve has his own engineering firm. He's with has a company he named Allied Design, and so he's doing quite well there. And Mark's doing well, and we're just enjoying.
How old is Mark?
Mark is 27.
And Steve?
Steve 39. He's been married about 11 years, and both of them decided, to wait a little later up in their age to get married, and we're quite pleased.
Well, my eldest, number one son will be 38
Yeah.
Sunday, and he just got married last fall.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, first time.
Yeah, Steve waited a long time.
Yeah. Well,
Our oldest
something
waited.
to be said for that, I guess.
Yeah, I think he made a good decision. Well pleased and happy with her.
Well, anything else?
I can't think of it. I think I've just talked you out of time.
Well, I got plenty of tape. Maybe not that much time, but
I know I didn't mean to go on.
that's no problem at all. In fact, that's what I wanted you to do.